where he was in his first year of law school and entered the First World War. He went to France as an ambulance driver, and he drove injured soldiers from the front lines to the hospital tents, and he was awarded the highest honor for bravery and service that the French government gives out, and that's called the Croix de Guerre, and he received that on May 2nd of 1918. He returned to Iowa City in the summer of 1919 at the end of the war. He married my mother, and he continued law school and graduated in 1921. Their first child was born 10 months after their marriage, and Dad always joked about the fact that he was very, very good at carrying a colicky child in one arm and then in the evening and his law book in the other so that he could study and take care of a child at the same time. Upon graduation, the three of them moved back to Winterset, and Dad went into law practice. He served as the county attorney there for 3 years, and in the mid-30s, he was the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Iowa. He tried many, many cases. He tried 7 of them, or 8 of them, that went to the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., and he won 7 of those cases. So he had a really great law background for what you're going to hear in a little bit. Then I was born in 1938. Mom and Dad, I think, were very surprised because they were 43 and 45 when I was born. I had a brother, 18, who was a freshman at Harvard. He was gone when I was born. And then I had a sister, 16, and another sister, 8. And so I think you'd have to admit that Mom and Dad were really surprised when they found out they were going to have their 4th child. A year after I was born, Dad was invited to go into a law firm in Iowa City, Iowa. And he decided, since he had 4 children to educate, and that that's the school that he and Mom both graduated from, it would be advantageous to move to Iowa City, and so we did. And I was a year old at that time. Someone said earlier in the evening that you don't know an awful lot about Malika, but I will tell you, guess where Malika was born? Iowa City, Iowa. On Christmas Day of December 25th of 1943, I ran down to the Christmas tree, and the family was quite sober, and I couldn't figure out why. Everybody was very quiet. And Dad stood up and came around to me and pinned an oak leaf cluster on my bathrobe, which I'm wearing tonight. And he said that since our brother, or his son and my brother, was in the Army, he was gone to the West Pacific, or to the South Pacific, he was a fighter jet pilot, or a fighter pilot on the USS Enterprise, that that Dad was also going, and he was leaving that night to go to Second World War. We all wore our oak leaf clusters every day until he came back. He even wore them on our pajamas at night. Never, ever was out without my oak leaf cluster. So it's real fun to wear it tonight because I haven't had it on for years. And he was 50 at the time when he entered. And so I think Mother probably thought he would never go out of the United States. But in 4 weeks, we were called from Fort Custer in Battle Creek, Michigan, that he was leaving the next week and would be going to the East Coast for some specialized training, and could we come and see him for a couple of days? So we got on a train. I remember sitting on the suitcase from Iowa City to Chicago in the middle of the aisle because there weren't enough seats. It was filled with soldiers going all over. And we got to spend 2 or 3 days with Dad. And I remember so well that Mother and my 2 older sisters were pretty upset about it. I didn't really understand what was going on, I don't think, but Dad took me aside the day he was leaving, and he said, you know, your sisters and your mother are going to cry. And he said, you're my brave little girl. I don't want you to cry. I do not want you to cry. Well, anything that my father said to me, I took very seriously. So that evening, we got in a taxi. We took him to the train station. He kissed us all goodbye, said goodbye, and everybody started to cry. But I still remember yelling to Daddy as he was on that train, look, Dad, I'm not crying, I'm not crying. And I didn't. Here is a picture of Dad when he received the Croix de Guerre from the French government, and this was taken This is from the Winterset newspaper. You can't really see, but that's almost 100 years old. And this is a picture of our family that was taken probably 10 months after he left. We were all wrapping Christmas presents to send overseas to the family. And my mother's sitting on the couch. My older sister is on the right, my middle sister on the left, and I'm in the center. And I just found that and thought it would be fun for you to see. Last April, two ladies in our church by the name of Sandra Woodruff and Lana Gray offered a class on writing your life story. And I'd always wanted to write some things about my family, not about me, but about Dad and Mother, and so I took the class. I really wanted our children and grandchildren to know all that he had done. Well, this class really got me started, and as I wrote the assignment each week, I began to read all of Dad's letters that he sent us for 2.5 years. Some of them, I just brought one little package of the original ones, right here. And you'll see if you look at them that they even have a censored thing on the front where they've been read by someone. Mother made copies of all of his letters, and I have them in 3 books here, and I've put a lot of little tags on them for things I wanted to reference so that I could go back to them and all. But I just wanted you to see that he wrote us every 2 or 3 days for 2.5 years. As I started to read all of these, I was amazed at what I learned from the letters. He went from Battle Creek to Yale University for legal training in Army affairs, and he then went to England. One letter describes his ship that he went over the Atlantic in as having beautiful staterooms, wonderful food, and a large ballroom. I wonder now if it might have been the Queen Mary, but I have no way to find out. In May of 1944, he wrote that he was one of 15 out of 1,000 picked to attend a special British civil officer staff school. It was intense, and one project that he had to do was to write how to move 10,000 refugees without getting them on the main roads, figuring the food and supplies for a community of 130,000 people so they would have at least 2,000 calories per day and extra calories for hard workers, pregnant, and nursing mothers. He talked about the bombing going on all around him and how cold and damp it was. Oh dear, what did I do? Well, John can help me. There he is, in England. He talked about several of the families with whom he lived, and after some months in England, he was ready to go to Europe. The process of crossing the English Channel took quite a while. He wrote that they were ordered to pack and be ready to leave, but they would not leave. They would just sit, and then they would move to another spot, and they would wait, and they would wait, and they would wait. And finally he wrote, and I'm going to quote you some things from some letters that he wrote. Finally, on September 7th, 1944, he wrote, "Since a week ago yesterday, we have had nothing to eat but sea rations and are sleeping on the steel floor of the ship. Our bedrolls are in the trucks in lower hold area, and we are not permitted to get them." On September 16th, which was 9 days later, so almost 2 weeks, he wrote, "It will be 2 weeks tomorrow since I have had a bath or changed my clothes. I am not complaining, but I'm giving you something to laugh about when you think of your husband and Daddy, who always liked his trousers so neatly pressed, a clean shirt every day, and a properly matched tie, and a haircut every Friday." I cannot tell you which port we've landed, but we will probably sit on the ship for another 2 days and then drive 175 miles to our location. And then he wrote, "I am sleeping in a French chateau, no bed, only marble floor, with no bathrooms in 217 rooms. There are 2 toilets, no lavatory, and 1 faucet for 75 men. We are using our steel helmets for wash basins." At some point, a family member told me that they were quite sure this was the Palace of Versailles. In France, he talked about giving lectures on military courts of the German legal system, and they were getting ready to enter Germany. He talked about Thanksgiving in one letter in 1944 and how down he got that he had to leave the table because he could not stop the tears and how much he missed the family. Some of his letters contain lessons to us in values, morals, ethics, and he wrote me bedtime stories, and I'm going to tell you one of them because I thought it was really clever. He wrote about a man and his son who were walking to the grocery store to purchase their groceries, and on the way home, when the father was fully burdened with grocery sacks, he saw a horseshoe in the middle of the road, and he said to the young boy, "Would you please pick up that horseshoe? Our horse needs a new horseshoe." And the little boy said, "I wouldn't pick that up, it's dirty, I wouldn't." So the father accidentally spilled a strawberry out of the bag, and the little boy picked it up, dusted it off, and ate it. So the father dropped another one, and the little boy picked it up, dusted it off, and ate it. And he did that 5 times, and when they got home, the father was unloading the groceries, and the little boy said, "Where'd all the strawberries go that we bought at the store?" And the father said, "You picked them up off the dirty road and dusted them off and ate it for yourself, but you couldn't pick up the dirty horseshoe for me." And my dad wrote, "Judy, always think of others before you think of yourself." Finally, Dad got to Germany, and this is why he had such specialized training in various locations. He entered the city of Nuremberg on April 20th, 1945, which was Hitler's birthday. His letter 6 days later said, "It will be a week tomorrow since I hit the city. During that week, we have lived almost like beasts in destroyed or partially bombed buildings. No gas, no water, no lights, but plenty of dirt and brick dust. Dirty cold water to wash and shave in. It's not conducive to good humor. I have had many sad cases in the office. Today, one boy was 21. He came here in 1937 when he was 13 to visit his grandparents. He has been unable to get back to America. Another German woman was brought in yesterday bleeding from a beating by a mob of Russian displaced persons. We even have German soldiers coming in and surrendering to us, and British prisoners who have escaped from German camps wanting to work." On May 20th, 1945, he wrote the following, and this is a little bit long, but I think it's really interesting for you. "Nuremberg, where I am stationed, was one of the beautiful cities in Germany before the war. The old medieval city proper was surrounded by a high wall and great moats. Then as the city grew, the outer part was about the most modern in any of Europe. It was one of Hitler's favorite cities and a hotbed for Nazism." And of course, this is where the infamous Hitler parade grounds were, in Nuremberg. "I entered the city of 440,000 the early morning of April 20th, just 5 years from the day Hitler said, 'Give me 5 more years and you will not recognize Germany.' This once beautiful city is now a heap of debris, very few buildings untouched, and most of them completely demolished. As I said, I entered on the morning of April 20th. I came with a lieutenant as advance party for our detachment to arrange for quarters and offices. The outer part of the city had already fallen to our armies, but fighting was still going on within the old city, where the German soldiers, police, and firemen had barricaded themselves, with the Americans cleaning them out, building by building. We could get to within about 100 yards of the old wall, most of which had been knocked down. Finally, in the afternoon, after several German civilians talked over our loudspeaker system, begging their own forces to surrender and save further loss of life, the inner circle of the city fell. Then I really started to work." And there he is. "My duties and responsibilities have included, number 1, taking over control of all German courts in the city, including a court of appeals for the Central Third of Bavaria, preserving the court records, procuring lists of all judges, prosecutors, and lawyers, having them all screened by the Counterintelligence Corps, selecting a committee to supervise repairing the court building, which received a couple of bomb hits. Number 2, taking over control and supervision of 4 prisons in this area, preparing a situation report on conditions existing in the prisons, requiring reports on all prisoners, requiring reports on all employees, and having them screened by the CIC as to their Nazi tendencies, reviewing the cases of some 105 political prisoners held by the Germans and recommending their release. Number 3, acting as judge of a military government court to try all civilians who violate any of the proclamations or orders of the Army. To date, I have convicted 350 people in 1 month. And then number 4 is to furnish legal advice to some 40 American officers who supervise the other branches of government. And number 5, try to keep hundreds of people out of my office who want advice on how to recover property the Nazis took from them, if they can now take property that belongs to the Nazis, how and when to get to the United States, or how can they get a job with us. However, I shall say by closing, now that the war is over, I wish to hell I were home. But he didn't get home for another 10 months. On August 29th, he wrote that his court buildings, which were the original buildings where now you see that the war crimes, big trials were held, were taken over by the War Crimes Commission. And so he moved his staff to a building just outside of Nuremberg in the town of Fürth. And that's his staff, and he is on the first row on the second from the left. You can't see it, but it's just that he had quite a few employees. He wrote that in September, he wrote, yesterday they moved the finance section upstairs and gave me 2 more big rooms. So now I have a suite of 5 rooms, 3 lawyers, 2 GI interpreters, 1 court reporter, 3 civilian secretaries, all of whom speak German, English, and French. One even takes shorthand in all 3 languages. One of the hardest things seems to be that they could hire no Nazis. So there was no one to run the city utilities such as water, gas, sewage, street lights, city offices, the traffic, etc. And you may remember that Patton suggested that the Allies be able to hire some of the Nazis to help run the cities, but they were not allowed to do it. And then, he was released from his duties in 1945. Dad tried thousands of cases for curfew violations, black marketing, theft, rape, and the big case of the 2 men who hid and lied about the Holy Roman Empire jewels. In 1938, on Hitler's orders, the insignia and the jewelry of the Holy Roman Empire were brought from Austria to Nuremberg, and the treasury in Vienna, where they had been displayed, was closed. Julius Linke was the architecture supervisor and directed the city planning office in Nuremberg. Thus, he knew the location of the bunkers where all of the artwork and the treasures confiscated by the Nazis was hidden. He packed the jewels into copper containers. 2 men, Conrad Fries and Heinz Schmeisner, were the principal players in the bunker's construction and maintenance, and they held the keys to the bunkers. They had the treasures put in duffel bags, and they were taken by bicycle to a second bunker under an elementary school, and then they were buried in cement in a wall. And Hitler thought that he would be able to keep them with no one finding them or even knowing where they might be. Linke then disappeared, and he never came back. They all thought he was dead until much later in the story. The other 2 men were charged with obstruction of justice and stood trial in Dad's military court in Fürth in 1945, September. They were found guilty of giving false testimony to U.S. personnel, and they were sentenced to 5 years in prison and fined $2,500 in 1945 money, which would be a lot more now. After serving 20 months, they were pardoned and released and relieved of their fines. But Linke, the man who they thought was dead, reappeared in 1947, shortly after the release of his 2 comrades. So after they were found, you'll see here that this is the Commander General of the American Forces in Austria, Mark Clark, and he's inspecting the Holy Roman Empire regalia after it was discovered. And I'm so sorry that you can't see, but in the center is a crown. It's kind of in the middle of the picture. It has some points that go up and a little bit of black, which is, I believe, the velvet of the top of the crown. And there are also gloves, which each of the Holy Roman Empire's emperors wore when they were crowned with that crown. And there is also what is called a reliquary, which contains a piece of tablecloth, supposedly from the Last Supper, and a piece of Christ's apron. This was very interesting to me because the Last Supper and the washing of feet are engraved on the back of it, and it's the last thing you see. Supposedly, the parts of the lance with which The Roman Empire, or the Roman soldier pierced Jesus' side in John 19:34 is also in the collection. Not the whole spear, but a nail and part of the metal that was on it, and it's been put into another spear, and it's shown with these artifacts. On a Saturday, Dad wrote, "Today we drove over winding roads, around hills, through little villages, and along beautiful streams, all in my 7-passenger canary-colored Mercedes-Benz car. I really feel like a general in the back seat with my Belgian driver in front. I can only assume that he had this because of his authority and position and that they were taking good care of him, but how different is it from marching miles, sleeping on dirt floors in bombed buildings with no water? You know, it's quite interesting to me." He wrote that he had been asked by the War Crimes Commission to be one of the prosecutors in the big trials, and his reply was, "God, please deliver me from ever having anything to do with that." And the colonel who had asked him replied, "Major, I think that's the smartest thing you've ever said." And on November 6th, he wrote, "Yesterday was my birthday, and what a day. When I returned to my room from shaving, I found 2 immense bouquets of chrysanthemums and a birthday cake put there by the 2 ladies who take care of our house. Then when I walked into the office, one of the stenographers handed me a big bouquet of flowers, and just as I was thanking her, in came the other 2, each with big bouquets. And as I held the 3 bunches, the 4th girl came in and pulled a bottle of cognac out of her bag, all tied with flowers and ribbon. And then little Anna Maria, my favorite, came in with roses in one hand and her accordion in the other. She got it out and she played for all of us. But then I had to leave to go to court in Schwarbach, so I assumed they had no cognac. When I returned in the evening, the flowers were on and around my desk, and a big plant was given to me by my driver. And then I found a note to stop at the Hartners for a piece of birthday cake as I went home at 7. There I found 2 captains and 3 civilian couples in dress suits and evening gowns, and a table covered with flowers, champagne, a cigarette case, gifts, and a lunch. A few days later, he wrote that they were preparing to return the civil courts back to the local officials, and that he had been asked to be the executive director in charge. I don't know what happened after that because we have no letters past November 14th. He returned to Iowa City in March of 1946. I don't know whether the letters from November to March were lost by my mother, what happened to them, but we don't have anything. So I don't know whether he was in fact the executive officer of that whole civilian court situation or not. As a result of the writing class and all the letters I've been reading, Chuck and I took a trip last October to visit the Holy Roman Empire jewels at the Hofburg